My name's Justin the Clue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're going to be talking about Dorothy Arzner, the director of Dance Girl Dance, The Wild Party,
Merrily We Go to Hell, Get Your Man, Christopher Strong.
And you may be asking yourself, wait, I've never heard of any of these movies.
Dorothy Arzner is the most prolific female filmmaker of the Hollywood studio era.
And she wasn't the first woman director. Alice Guy Blanchet was one of the first directors ever. She pretty much did the first narrative film, and there were other along the way, but like most women in careers dominated by men, and by that I mean every career, if they had one screw up or one little thing that went wrong, they were excluded forever from that career.
But in the late 20s, the 30s, and the early 40s, Dorothy Arzner worked consistently as a writer-director, often making, let's call them, women's pictures.
Yeah. She got started in the industry when she became a script girl, and from there she moved up to be a cutter and then an editor. She worked most famously on Blood and Sand, the 1922 version, which starred Rudolph Valentino, and from there she went on and formed a relationship with James Cruise, and she helped edit films like Ruggles of Red Gap from 1923 and The Covered Wagon.
Dorothy Arzner may not be a familiar name. I think she's becoming more reclaimed in recent years because there's a great appetite for female filmmakers and like the history of woman directors. And in particular, her film Dance Girl Dance was rediscovered by the second wave feminists of the 1970s, and I've been hearing it just talked about more and more lately. In fact, here in Toronto, there was a screening of it at the Royal recently.
Yeah, as part of the Ladies of Burlesque screenings.
Dorothy Arzner has been kind of reclaimed as kind of a proto-feminist icon. That said, having kind of immersed myself in her films this week, her films are definitely historical artifacts.
Yeah, I think that they're movies that are more interesting to talk about, like, what they are and what they represent, more than they're films that you would recommend to a friend and go, man, this movie's great. Because I don't think any of the ones that I saw were really great in the way that we expect films to be. Like, I read this week, directed by Dorothy Arzner, which was a thesis kind of book by Judith Main that came out in the early 90s. And even in that, the author starts with, listen, these movies are not undiscovered classics, but I think it's important to talk about them and to talk about the person that made them and the system that she was able to work in at the time that she did.
Yeah, the films are often interesting for what they say, what they're not allowed to say, what they're hinting at. And yeah, they're just interesting as kind of like stepping stone films.
Yeah,
you know?
And the fact that Arzner actually worked through multiple different eras of the Hollywood system, and that she was someone who was very consciously trying to be independent. She went from studio to studio in the later years of her career, and she actually worked with the same screenwriters and would bring along the production team that she wanted because she had an idea of the film that she wanted to make, which was against the grain of what the studio system represented, which was that the director got the script, everything was already designed for them, and then they went off and made the movie.
Many of the films are about the sexual double standard in society. Many of her films are about how women try to function in a so-called man's world. Many of her films deal with taboo topics like adultery and the transactional nature of sex. Oftentimes the films are sneakily subversive. Sometimes they don't quite say what we as a modern audience want them to say, but they're sort of hinting at it.
And I think what's very important about Dorothy Arzner as well is that she was known as a gay filmmaker. And by that I mean that, like, she wasn't openly gay, like you could not be in the Hollywood studio system, but that, like, as far as her relationships went, everybody was very conscious that worked within the system, that she was in a long-term relationship with Marion Morgan. And I think that, like, anybody who writes about her, they have to approach it from that angle and, like, what that meant.
I think we should maybe start by talking about her most famous movie.
Dance Girl Dance.
Dance Girl Dance from 1940, a film that she made for RKO. This is the one that the second wave feminists rediscovered in the 70s. It stars Maureen O'Hara and a young, feisty Lucille Ball as small-time burlesque dancers.
Sexpot Lucille Ball, finally on the big screen.
Yeah, they're small-time dancers. Lucille Ball is somebody with a body, and she knows how to use it and wants to advance her career in, let's say, the burlesque world.
As far as the Hays Code would let burlesque go at this point in time.
Maureen O'Hara is a very serious ballerina who wants to do more artistic work. Lucille Ball becomes a much bigger star, and she gives Maureen O'Hara an opportunity to work with her on her big burlesque review on Broadway. But what Maureen O'Hara learns is she's actually a stooge who comes on halfway through. So for the first act, Lucille Ball comes out, she strips, she does sexy va-va-voom dancing, then she goes out, then Maureen O'Hara comes out doing a very serious, square ballet act, and the men in the audience boo her and hiss at her and abuse her and make fun of her until Lucille Ball comes back out.
And what the movie builds to is this climactic moment where Maureen O'Hara just turns on the audience and basically just rips into them.
Go on, laugh, get your money's worth. No one's going to hurt you. I know you want me to tear my clothes off so you can look at your 50 cents worth. 50 cents for the privilege of staring at a girl the way your wives won't let you. What do you suppose we think of you up here with your silly smirks your mothers would be ashamed of? We know it's the thing of the moment for the dress suits to come and laugh at us too. We'd laugh right back at you, only we're paid to let you sit there and roll your eyes and make your screamingly clever remarks. What's it for? So you can go home when the show's over, strut before your wives and sweethearts and play at being the stronger sex for a minute? I'm sure they see through you. I'm sure they see through you just like we do.
That's a great speech, and it almost feels like it's directed to the audience.
Yeah, and that speech is really the speech on which Dorothy Arzner's reputation is built, I think.
Yeah, I mean, other than the fact that, like, she was a women filmmaker at a time that there was none that were working as much as she was.
But this is a very powerful scene in the movie, and it's the scene that everyone talks about in relation to her.
Yes. They kind of forget the rest of the movie, which is fine.
Yeah, it's fine. And I mean, this is kind of the disappointment with this week, because, there were none of the movies I watched this week that I really disliked or anything, but there was also a ceiling in terms of how much I liked them.
Well, could it just be that it's movies that were not for you and me at this point in time?
That's the question I guess we have to ask, because not only are these movies, made by a woman and made, I think, primarily for women audiences, but also these movies are dated historical artifacts.
And when you watch them, you have to realize as well that, like, Arzner mostly worked in the kind of like fluffy rich people getting together genre in the Depression, where like these movies were popular. And I've said this multiple times before, I hate rich people, especially when I have to watch them on screen in the way that like Hollywood has kind of like molded them. And like these movies were kind of tough for me to engage with in that way, especially that Arzner, her men are simpering wimps, jerks, assholes. But because this is the way stories were supposed to be told, oftentimes they still get together with the woman at the end of the movie.
I think where Arzner really intersects with my interests is in the pre-code era of her career. I mean, I know you and I both love pre-code Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
I watched one this week called Merrily We Go to Hell from 1932.
Great title.
Great title. And in fact, some newspapers actually refused to advertise that title.
Real, because hell.
Yeah, because hell was in it.
I remember when Hellboy came out and I was like, whoa, they could put hell in a movie title?
Did you know, this is off topic, but did you know the South Park movie, Bigger, Longer, Uncut, the MPAA originally rejected the title South Park All Hell Breaks Loose?
Because hell's in the title?
Because hell was in the title. And
That's
so they
great.
replaced it with Bigger, Longer, Uncut, and the MPAA didn't realize there was a double entendre in that also.
The MPAA is garbage.
Anyway, Merrily We Go to Hell stars Frederick March as a drunken reporter and aspiring playwright who is put on the path to sobriety when he marries a good-hearted heiress played by Sylvia Sidney. Meanwhile, he sells one of his plays, which is about to be staged on Broadway, but the leading lady is his former girlfriend, played by Adrienne Allen, and he relapses. He starts up an affair with Adrienne Allen again, and his wife, Sylvia Sidney, says to him in a memorable line, "If being a modern husband gives you privileges, then being a modern wife gives me privileges." So she starts up an affair with a young Cary Grant. So the movie, it's an odd mix of comedy and heavy melodrama with a bit of a decadent, rich person, early Depression, pre-code atmosphere. It has some interesting things to say, again, about the sexual double standards of the time. Also, the movie... Spoiler alert. There are going to be a lot of spoilers in this episode, by the way.
Because we have to talk about the endings of the movies.
What is often interesting or lacking about these films comes in the shocking plot twists. But, in the ending of the movie, she gives birth to his child, but the child dies after 2 hours. And the movie ends with what may or may not be a deathbed reconciliation. We don't know if she's going to survive, but they do reconcile, which surprised me a little bit because normally in a movie like this, it would just end with her dying.
I mean, this is where, when you start talking about Dorothy Arzner, like these finales, especially at their most toxic, which me and Will watch a movie with one of them that's like, woof, we'll get to it though, are weird when you consider what kind of person she was, because she was someone who was incredibly driven about what she wanted to do. There's an anecdote about how she got her job directing movies, and that was because she was working as kind of like a title writer in the silent era, writing scripts and stuff like that, and she wanted to direct, and the boss at Paramount at the time, which was kind of considered a poverty row studio, said, no, I'm sorry, we can't give it to you. And they didn't say because she was a woman, but come on, that's what he meant. And she said, all right, I'm going to go to another studio then. And he's like, no, wait, don't, you can't do that. And she said, listen, I'm going and I'm leaving unless you give me like a movie in a couple of weeks that I can start directing right away. And because she was so good at her job and have kind of become part of that Paramount family, they didn't want her to go. They said, no, okay, fine, you can direct a movie. Showing that she only got the opportunities that she got because she forced them to happen. And if you look at photos of her as well, she is a woman that, like, when she was working on all these sets, she was actually dressed most often like the men, like in a way that has been described as like a very butch style. She would wear no makeup. She would gel her hair back. And if you look at photos on sets of like movies that she edited, you can see that all the women are dressed in like long dresses, and Dorothy Arzner is just wearing like a shirt and just pants. And that she, in that way, became part of like the family, but she wasn't still like one of the guys. Like she was always a woman in a way that like was very evident in the movies that she went off and made.
Let's talk a little bit about Christopher Strong from 1933. This is one that we both saw and I don't think we liked very much.
No, this is one that its star, Katharine Hepburn, was very excited to make because for like the first time in her career, she could work with a woman director. And supposedly they did not get along very well, to the point that Katharine Hepburn actually complained to like the studio head that like Dorothy Arzner was ruining the film and that she was making decisions that she didn't agree with. She actually thought that Arzner was actually too tough with the staff as well. And she really disliked the screenwriter that worked on the film because she thought she was too hoity-toity and like rich.
Katharine Hepburn in this movie basically plays Amelia Earhart, a feisty, strong, independent, famous aviator who falls in love with Christopher Strong.
A married man.
A married man who's married to Billy Burke, who you might know as Glinda, the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz. Oh, and by the way, Christopher Strong is played by Colin Clive, who you might know as Dr. Frankenstein. So there's an affair happening there, and Billy Burke knows that it's happening, but also Colin Clive and Billy Burke have a daughter who is in love with a married man. This married man ends up divorcing his wife, but finds out, the daughter spent the night with another man.
Yes.
And so she's ruined in his eyes. However, eventually
they get back together.
Yeah, he comes to see past this and they come back together. Two people who do not get together are Katharine Hepburn and Colin Clive, because Katharine Hepburn realizes, well, she's destroying Colin Clive's marriage, so what should I do?
I should kill myself.
I should get up into a plane and just crash the plane.
Yes. Now, this is a problem to any modern audience watching it, because what you want to happen is she to realize, this simpering little man who the film gives no indication is good in any way, I should just toss him aside and continue on with my life. Because she has passion, she has dreams, she has stuff that she wants to do and that she's good at, but because she can't get this man's love, she decides to kill herself.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate because it's pre-code Hollywood, but even in pre-code Hollywood, there were still rules that people had to follow.
And we forgot to mention here that Katharine Hepburn is also pregnant with Christopher Strong's son.
Oh, yes.
Or daughter, or whatever, his child.
So this is a pretty saucy movie. There's an amazing scene where she goes to Colin Clive's house for the night, and then it cuts to the bedstand, and you see Katharine Hepburn's hand reach out to the alarm clock, and she says in sort of a breathy voice, "It's late."
So, like, all the stuff is there, and a lot of Dorothy Arzner's films do deal with this idea of, like, adultery or, like, breaking these moral codes and what it means to break them. It's just unfortunate that to our modern eyes, at the end, it's usually, like, the person making, like, a sacrifice that she did not have to do to stay by her man.
I mean, Christopher Strong has interesting things in it, like the relationship between the daughter and her fiancé.
Yes, who then demonize the Katharine Hepburn character and say, we saw what you did.
Yeah.
And that, like, we're going to tell our father.
And he also says, like, we don't pretend to be saints, unlike you.
Yes,
Yeah.
whatever. Just the idea that Katharine Hepburn, like, wants to do stuff makes her a saint of some kind.
But I mean, I think you can sense, like, this is a movie a little bit at war with itself. I mean, honestly, the movie also feels a little long at 78 minutes. It's a bit repetitive. I did like Katharine Hepburn's skin-tight silver lame outfit.
Looking like she'd be in some kind of sci-fi movie with, like, little antennas on her head.
When she put it on, I thought, oh, there must be, like, a costume party scene coming up. Nope.
It's just the fashion of the time.
Incredible.
I mean, I watched a few of Dorothy Arzner's other films as well, like Craig's Wife, which is a film that came out in 1936, which is about the main character played by Rosalind Russell, who is in a loveless marriage with a very rich man. And the movie essentially is the journey of the man realizing, wow, this woman doesn't actually love me. She just wants me because it allows her to get the money to do whatever she wants. And this film presents Craig's wife, if you will, as a controlling, kind of demeaning person who talks down to her help, like the maids and stuff like that. And like it wants you at the end to kind of be on Craig's side as he turns up against her, even though the film starts with Russell saying to another woman, I only married because it was a form of emancipation. It allowed me to achieve my dreams in a way that I could never do because I don't have any money. And that's what I'm using the man to do.
And that's, I think, really interesting.
I think that that's really like something to discover. But the problem with the film is, as far as its story goes, it's about how this person is evil and how you want to see her fail. Because all the decisions she's made, she will end up alone.
This is the problem, like with Dorothy Arzner as kind of a proto-feminist figure, is because she works best as a proto-feminist figure in like individual moments in the movies. And I mean, honestly, you can't really blame her for not like being fitting perfectly a rubric of like a 1970s era second wave feminist.
Yes, I know. Yeah, like it's impossible.
The concept of feminism didn't exist at the time.
And the fact that she was still going forward and did want to be an independent, she actually left some of the big studios because she didn't want to have to do the projects that they were giving her, and that she wanted to go on and do her own stuff. Like she made a movie with Joan Crawford, The Bride Wore Red, in MGM, which we talked about last episode, and it was so difficult for her because it was like a studio-driven project and she didn't have the control that she wanted. And the fact that Louis B. Mayer hated her, probably because she was a woman who wanted to do her own thing, made her life very difficult. And it's kind of linked to the fact that many people believe that her experience at MGM kind of tanked her career. Because even Dance Girl Dance was Dorothy Arzner taking over for another director who had to leave the project. So it wasn't even something that she created herself.
Did you watch any of her silent films?
I did. I actually watched The Wild Party, the Clara Bow film, and I know you watched another Clara Bow film.
Yeah, I watched Get Your Man.
And how was that one?
It was okay. It was a breezy 1 hour because I think something like 20 minutes of it had been lost actually, but it has recently been restored.
Oh, really?
I didn't see the restored version. I saw a bad public domain version, but it stars Clara Bow as a woman in Paris, a visitor to Paris who falls in love with a nobleman played by Charles Buddy Rogers. I just did air quotes over Buddy. He's a nobleman who has been betrothed to a woman early in his childhood. So it's an arranged marriage comedy, my favorite genre. And she realizes that she's not going to sit by and let this happen. She's going to get her man by having the fiancé's father fall in love with her. Yeah. But then Charles Buddy Rogers' father also falls in love with her. Shenanigans, complications ensue. It's a very lighthearted comedy that nevertheless has plenty to say about, how gender in marriage was perceived at the time.
I mean, all of Dorothy Arzner's films are saying that kind of stuff. This idea that, like, men can get drunk and they can be crazy, and that's fine. They're just being men. But if women do that, whoa, like they are exiles and they cannot work in polite society. Like the Clara Bow film I watched, The Wild Party, a film that Dorothy Arzner is famous for inventing the boom pole on, because sound was just coming into effect, and the way they would do it was putting microphones around the set. But Clara Bow hated this, so Dorothy Arzner engineered a long fishing pole with some microphone on the end of it that someone could then hold and follow the action with. Unfortunately, Dorothy Arzner did not patent that idea, and it was actually patented like years later by somebody else. So she got no credit for that, or money, most importantly. But so The Wild Party is about Clara Bow, who's at an all-women's college, and that she's like a fun party girl who's like independent, likes to do what she likes to do. And then she falls in love with one of her teachers, who is a prig and a stick in the mud, who believes that Clara Bow could just be so much better if she just stopped her partying ways. And eventually she does, and he still acts like a jackass, so she goes off on her own way. But then when he's shot, she feels more sympathy for him again, and they get involved. And then the film is actually kind of interesting in the way that it ends, unlike most of the Dorothy Arzner films that I saw, in that Clara Bow actually takes a bullet for a friend who was involved in an affair. Clara Bow actually says, "Oh, it was me that did it," because by doing that, she allows her friend to continue with her scholarship and to be allowed to go do more. And because of that, Clara Bow has to leave university and college. She can't do it anymore. And her Beau, who's a teacher, actually leaves college as well. So it's kind of like both of the people sacrificing stuff for the love that they have, which is a great finale, even though that up until then, it's the guy being like, you can be so much more if you just stopped all this fun stuff and being independent and drinking.
Sounds interesting. I mean, even though there was a limit to how much I loved these movies, I am like interested in exploring a little bit more from her career because, the movies often seem a little bit at war with themselves.
Well, I think that's the most interesting part about Dorothy Arzner is that like these scenes and these moments say a lot about who she was, even though that they have to be packaged within this Hollywood product. That I think that with context, the movies can like mean a lot more than they would on just a first go around. And I mean, if you want to discover her career, even though we've been saying that she is one of the like longest running women filmmakers in early Hollywood, it ended dead in 1943, where in the middle of shooting a war picture, First Comes Courage, she actually got pneumonia and had to step down, and somebody else had to come and do the final weeks of the film. And after that, she went during World War II and she shot kind of instructional videos for women in the army. And after that, she kind of decided, listen, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I've done my Hollywood filmmaking career. And she went on and did more stuff. She did a radio show. She taught at UCLA for 4 years.
And she taught people like Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, and he says that it was very important for him. And I believe that at Paramount, they actually named a Dorothy Arzner building after her.
And she lived long enough to see her name kind of come back into prominence.
Yeah, that people were like writing about her. She was interviewed by the BFI when they did a retrospective about her films, even though that her films, even at this point, like Criterion's not putting them out, there's no special editions or anything. Like one of the movies that I tried to watch, Working Girls, the copy that I was able to get my hands on is the worst like movie that I've seen visually ever, like available now, where it's like everything's blown out, the sound is awful, and that's the only available copy that people can watch now.
I think this will change. I've been hearing more about Dorothy Arzner lately, and I feel like there will be more restorations and more companies like Criterion will start to investigate this.
And that I do think that like when we're able to properly follow her career from beginning to end, you will see like an evolution, and I think that'll be really important. But as it stands now, like the movies, when we watch them, we go, yeah, these are fine. But again, like maybe it doesn't speak to us like it would speak to an audience in the era that they were released.
I do recommend Dance Girl Dance, though.
I actually recommend The Wild Party. I think that it's really good, especially Clara Bow, who is like such a charismatic figure. I mean, she was the it girl.
Yes.
So to see her working with someone like Dorothy Arzner is really important.
So, Justin, do we have any letters?
We do have letters this week, and you can send them, as per usual, to importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And the first one is from Sinjin, and it goes, "Hi, I'm a huge fan of your show and proud to support through the Patreon. Thank you. Could you two talk about current film criticism? I'd love to hear about any writers you particularly enjoy. Best, Sinjin. Well, my favorite definitely has to be Jonathan Rosenbaum's Naked People who show up on Twitter, and you're like, whoa, wow, oh my God, Jonathan, what are you doing?"
Yeah, I love, looking up Jonathan Rosenbaum's review of Eyes Wide Shut and then just seeing he's loaded it with pictures of Nicole Kidman's ass.
Yep.
It's like, why?
But as far as like...
Jonathan Rosenbaum is a man of Falstaffian appetites for wine, women, and song.
And I don't know if Jonathan Rosenbaum is like a current critic other than like the articles that he writes for CinemaScope, the DVD articles that me and Will flip to first thing when we get the magazine.
I think those articles, he writes those only for us.
Yeah,
you know?
So too. These stream of consciousness kind of rambling things about DVDs that are only available in France.
Yeah, the Region 2 Blu-ray of, I don't know, Godard's Hail Mary or something like
exactly.
that.
How about you, Will? Who are you reading right now?
Oh, boy. When I pick up a Sight and Sound or a film comment, I often first look for. I like Nick Pinkerton. I like friend of the podcast, Violet Lucca, a lot. You know, I always enjoy Tony Raines, who has
I actually really like Tony Raines as well.
He's been writing about Asian film for a long time, and, you know, along with maybe David Bordwell and a couple others, he's probably the best person.
I'm always shocked that, I mean, I don't know Tony Raines. I've never seen a picture of him, but I'm like, he's still alive?
Yeah.
Because it feels like he's been writing about this forever, doing some of the earliest commentary track on, like, Asian DVD releases. So the fact that he's still doing it warms my heart with joy.
Yeah. I like, I mean, Reverse Shot is probably the web-based film criticism website I check the most. And, you know, I also like, in terms of more like genre stuff, I enjoy Stephen Thrower's books a lot.
Oh, I love Stephen Thrower, especially as like a historian, because he's a guy that like sometimes he'll talk so passionately about a movie that I get like Jonathan Rosenbaum-itis, where I go like, "Wow, man, this sounds great. I'm going to see this." And then I watch it, I'm like, "Huh? What? I don't see it."
It's become a fun ritual for me where, you know, if a Jess Franco movie comes out on Blu-ray.
Oh, he's so good at those.
Every Blu-ray will always have, an interview with Stephen Thrower where he explains where this fits into Franco's career. And oftentimes the interview will go for 25 minutes because there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. And I think that is the kind of criticism that I like the most, is someone who's very passionate about what they're talking about. And even if I don't agree with everything they say, the way that they kind of present it and let you know that this is their opinion and how it makes them feel, that's what I enjoy the most. I mean, it's tough for me to think of anybody like one. Jacob Knight is a guy that I really enjoy reading on Birth Movies Death. But mostly his reviews, I see them on like Letterboxd and stuff like that. That is the place these days that I will look and like, if somebody likes a movie and I agree with that person, I'll go, "Ooh, wow, I've never heard of this movie before." You
know, the sick thing is like this era has melted my brain to such an extent that I find myself like hate reading a lot of critics very dependably.
I do not do that.
I know you don't. So this is a big difference between you and me. So it's like, you know, Lights, Camera, Jackson will have a review and it's like, oh,
he only exists because of you and your brethren.
Or, you know, Sally Jane Black.
I don't even know who that is.
Letterboxd is, she's like kind of the wokest of woke critics, but she's also a tanky.
What's a tanky?
A tanky is somebody who, is an apologist for Joseph Stalin and believes that
what?
Stalin did no wrong and believes that communist China really is like a good
That's an insane opinion.
Guess what, Justin? There's a whole contingent of these crazy people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
So
ignorance is bliss for me.
Yeah. Or like, you know, there are certain, you know, far right critics who, you know, I find myself compulsively checking. I think it's because
you like to challenge yourself, right?
Well, you know, on a website like Rotten Tomatoes, you'll notice that there's so much uniformity of opinion these days. Like, it used to be that if a movie got 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, that seemed like kind of a big deal, like 15 years ago. But now every movie gets 96% because all the critics have the same point of view. So I want to make myself hurt.
Yeah, but I think the problem with that, in my eyes, and this is only
and you're
my
probably
opinion,
right,
is that these people are insane. So It's not like they're vocalizing an opinion that you can go, I could see why you would react to it that way. Because like this article that I read or this review, you can back it up. As opposed to like most of these people, you're like, what are you talking about?
You're right. Listen, I like a good like
Armand White-ish.
Well, not Armand White. I think he's gotten pretty bad lately.
Too popular.
Too popular. But no, I like a good critic who, you know, I don't want to use the word contrarian, but I like a critic who can take a more unpopular, you know, Jonathan Rosenbaum, for example.
Yeah, is contrarian about some stuff.
But I mean, he has a very consistent worldview. And it's interesting to see something from that worldview.
And I think that's a little bit important for me, which is that like this consistency of worldview. Like, they can change their mind about stuff. Like, they can go, oh, I hated this, but now I like it because I watched it again. Yeah. But that it's not like, oh, I love this and I hate this. And you're like, but wait, they're both the same. And you're like, well, this one is unpopular, so I love it. And this one is popular, so I hate it. That's the thing that like drives me nuts the most. Where you can pinpoint someone's reaction based on public opinion. That's what I'm like.
So that's Armand White.
Yeah. I mean, like that I hate, and that's the stuff that I dislike the most. I mean, like
Armand White's worldview, if he has one, is that like he's angry at the world.
Yes, and that he just wants to fight against it.
Yeah, and so if something in this degraded society is popular, that means it must by definition be bad. Or if something is embraced by this degraded critical class, it must be bad, which, you know, I can sympathize with that point of view to an extent, although it's also a rather, the way that he practices it, it's rather nihilistic.
I'm trying to think of like critics, even to mention one that I enjoy, and I think that the ones that kind of excite me the most are ones that don't really talk about new films, but talk about old films or discovering old films and kind of bringing them to my attention. That's what I love the most. Like someone like the guys who write like Bleeding Skull and stuff like that. Like that I love because it's this archival, like digging into these giant piles of garbage to get stuff. Now, you're going to have reactions where you go, what, this is still garbage. But the fact that they go and do this stuff, that's what I find like really exciting. And it's like I have some Letterboxd people that I can't think off the top of my head that when they review something, I'm like, ooh, whoa, I haven't heard of this before. That like I will go and click and see what they said because that's exciting to me. Like someone even like Matt Lynch, who you see on every Letterboxd review. I don't know how he got on the top there, but he's a video clerk at Scarecrow Video in Seattle. And like his opinions, like I don't always agree with him, but I think they're formulated in a way that I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and will actually get me excited or unexcited about something.
There are some Letterboxd reviewers who I just think are so annoying.
Yeah, I don't follow them.
Yeah, but you see them all the time on the top
I block
reviews.
them. Like you can block people.
That's what I'm going to do sometime. Yeah, okay.
Because there were some people on Letterboxd that I kept seeing the reviews pop up, and I'm like, no, I don't want to see.
Like Sally Jane Black is at least funny.
Really? Okay.
But, well, I mean, not intentionally.
No,
like she's at least funny. But some of these like
I love how I've never seen that person.
Some of these white bread lamos, these dorky bespectacled
who needs to have an opinion that will make you stand up and go, whoa, that's crazy, and I will pay attention.
Yeah, or they're just like kind of nerdy guys like us.
Yeah, like us,
and so they're boring to me.
Yeah, normcore. Opinions.
Yeah.
I mean, someone like Robin Bougie, though, I love reading his stuff.
I love Robin Bougie. Yeah,
and like Cinema Sewer, and I think that not only is he approaching topics that a lot of them I'm very familiar with, but doing it in an interesting way because he does these zines that they're basically all hand illustrated.
I mean, a lot of people love the like video essays. I know Scout Tafoya does some really good video essays. I mean, video essays are often badly done. Have you ever seen any of Kentucker Audley's like parody video essays?
Yes, he did one on
Tim Burton's Powder.
Yes.
or like the use of emotion in Liar Liar or something like that.
I mean, because the thing about the video essay is that you have to sound serious about what you're talking about, and also, when it's like a wacky topic,
and it can also be a bit of a cheat because like you got the movie to fall back on. It's like people can be responding to just a great movie clip rather than the point you're making.
So I hope that at the end of this long discussion about critics, you're gonna go out and buy a Cinema Sewer book and don't read it around polite company because it is filled with naked ladies and men. Just images, and I remember reading one in high school and cracking it open and going, whoa.
Yeah, I remember, I think in grade 12, I bought the first Cinema Sewer anthology book, and I mean, now I'm a jaded hardcore guy. I'm rough and tough and can take anything, but back then, the hairs on the back of my neck really
I remember
really got stiff.
that the people around me just looked as when I opened it up and like looked at what I was reading, and they were like, what the heck? And I'm like, oh, it's movies, it's not what you think it is.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you again very much for the letter, and moving on, we have one from Charlie Yao, and it goes, hello, Most Important Cinema Club. Ooh, I like that name.
Most Important Cinema Club.
Wait, is there some other one out there, like Most Important Cinema Club International? I found your podcast through Michael and Us, and I am a big fan. Much more than Michael and Us. I added that part. I read between the lines. I'm eagerly waiting for the podcast Expanded Universe to have your Avengers with Will Sloan, Justin Decloux, Luke Savage, Matthew Kumar uniting in the movie podcast extravaganza of the summer.
It would be interesting to see the matter of Luke Savage meet the antimatter of Justin Decloux on an Avengers movie.
And what about like Matthew Kumar as well? Who would be who would go evil in this scenario?
You
probably don't want to say because you don't want to hurt any feelings of the people that are not here.
No, I actually am not sure.
Really?
Frankly, I don't know if the chemistry would work with the four of us talking about Avengers.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that a certain co-host I have would be angry at some other co-host that we would bring on. And that because as you may have heard, this certain co-host, which I will not name, he doesn't suffer fools gladly.
He's a hot-tempered guy, but then so is the other co-host, frankly.
They're just yelling at each other.
They may not get along.
Anyway, the letter continues, one of the themes of the podcast is how great Hong Kong cinema is, particularly that of the 80s and 90s period. It makes me wonder what your thoughts are on the flowering of mainland cinema of around that same time. The Blue Kite, Pharaoh My Concubine, and Raise the Red Lantern, which came out the same year as Once Upon a Time in China. Do you see any meaningful connection between the two cinemas, or do you think they should be treated as wholly different? Thanks and keep up the good work, Charlie. So mainland Chinese cinema is something I'm actually not that familiar with. Like, it's not a era of cinema that I've like went and explored after Hong Kong cinema, because I do think they're distinctly different.
They are very different. I mean, when I was a teenager and kind of getting into Hong Kong cinema, I watched a lot of those great mainland films because I didn't quite distinguish between the two of them yet. I didn't quite understand there was a difference between Hong Kong and mainland cinema, although I eventually figured it out, of course. I mean,
you're like, where's the martial arts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love the early Zhang Yimou movies and the early Chen Kaige films.
And what's funny about them is they actually just evolved into Hong Kong filmmakers, because if you look at Chen Kai making like The Promise, which is like a big, broad martial arts epic, or Zhang Yimou, making Hero, and that's basically what it feels like all he's been making since then. His next one is another big wuxia picture.
But also, like, the movies that we love from mainland China in that era were not the movies that were really being fostered by the official film culture. I mean, maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but, you know, a lot of Zhang Yimou's movies early on were banned in the mainland, but were very successful on the festival circuit around the world. And, you know, as the official film culture in China, the top-down film culture has gotten more rigid, you know, it's been heartbreaking for a lot of us who used to like these filmmakers, you know, to watch somebody like Zhang Yimou basically become a propaganda filmmaker. And it's heartbreaking to watch the mainland, you know, this sanitized,
this blob kind of just take over all these Hong Kong filmmakers.
Yeah.
Absorb them, really.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one way that the two industries are similar is they are both Chinese industries.
But I don't think there was that much bleed through, because we've talked about before, and again, we're not experts on this, but Hong Kong didn't have that much penetration in the mainland Chinese landscape.
No, but I mean, you know, Hong Kong films were dealing with China.
Yes,
like,
but
as a topic.
Our favorite ones from the 80s and 90s were dealing specifically with the threat of China taking over Hong Kong in 97. Like, True Hark's filmography, like, from the beginning up until, like, the early 2000s is all about the threat of China and what it's going to mean about changing the landscape of Hong Kong, until he just, you know, just became a mainland blockbuster filmmaker.
And I mean, the mainland movies that I like now are the ones by, like, Jia Zhangke, which again are...
He's kind of sold out a little bit lately.
A little bit. I mean, I'm interested in seeing how his career develops, but I mean, he's still somebody who is not exactly making propaganda films. I mean, he takes himself seriously as a Chinese filmmaker.
Yeah.
But he's showing something of the real China.
I think that it would be interesting to actually do an episode on, like, a mainland Chinese filmmaker, because we'd be talking about kind of an era of Chinese film that me and you, we don't explore that much. Yeah, and what that means.
Yeah, and I mean, it would also, I think, be interesting to maybe explore the history of mainland Chinese cinema, which has not been very proud. I mean, there have been long periods of inactivity in the Chinese film industry, you know, like during Mao's reign. There were long periods when people just didn't make films in mainland China, or what films were made were historical propaganda films, you know, The Taking of Tiger Mountain or that sort of thing.
And not the new Troy Hark one that came out a few years ago.
No, the old one.
Yeah. Anyway, hopefully that answered your question. And moving on, we have one last letter, and it goes, do kids still love Looney Tunes? And this letter is from Charlie. No last name is given. He goes, in your Looney Tunes podcast, you briefly ask whether or not kids enjoy old cartoons. They fucking love them. I am a full-time kindergarten teacher in Tokyo. Each lunchtime, if the children finish their food, they are allowed to have free play or watch videos with me. Since I can no longer stand watching the same episodes of Curious George over and over, I decided that the class will only be watching things that I also enjoy. So far, the only thing I found that resonates with both of them and the whole class are Looney Tunes and out-of-context Godzilla fights on YouTube. Looney Tunes is a particular hit, with Bugs Bunny being a class favorite. I have tried to show them early Mickey shorts, but while they love the character, they quickly get bored of the cartoons. That's because Mickey shorts are boring. I was surprised to find out that the original King Kong plays better than any of the modern versions, but only the parts where he fights dinosaurs.
Right.
Do you have any suggestions of things that might play well with kids who have a pretty good but still limited grasp of English? Thanks for all your hard work. Love the podcast, Charlie. That's interesting that they love the original King Kong, but not the CGI versions, because they respond to stop motion in a way that they don't to computer animation.
Well, if they like the original King Kong, they might like the silent version of The Lost World.
Yeah, tons of monsters in it.
Yeah.
They would probably like the fight scenes from Son of Kong, which have a lot of monsters in them.
I'm trying to think of what are the things that I liked as a kid, and it wasn't so much a matter of liking it; it was just a matter that a lot of it was
there.
on.
Yeah.
So the Flintstones.
Yeah,
would you recommend that to a kid?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend the Flintstones. I would maybe recommend something like Will Sloan's favorite, Adams West Batman.
Sure.
'Cause that's very colorful, but it may be a little bit too slow-paced for kids of this day and age, where they can go on the internet and watch whatever they want. I think that Three Stooges would probably hold up with them.
Not all, but some.
But some of them,
stuff.
some of the short stuff, because it's just slapstick. And even kids who, English is not their first language, they respond to it, because all you have to do is why I yada.
Yeah. But stick to Curly, I would say.
Yeah, don't go into the Shemp era.
Right.
Or what's the one that goes that hurt?
Joe Besser.
Yeah, or Curly Joe.
Hey, buddy boy.
Yeah, stay away from that as far as possible. I mean, to pick an obvious one, because you said Japan, Ultraman, the 30-minute or 21-minute TV show that you can buy on really cheap DVDs, are filled with monster action and are very short. So I think kids will respond to that, especially if they respond to something like the original King Kong. Because guys in suits fighting is always more fun than animated CGI people fighting.
I mentioned on the Looney Tunes episode how much I enjoy Tex Avery, who started as a Looney Tunes director and then he made cartoons for MGM. I could rattle off the names of some Tex Avery cartoons that I know kids would still like. King Size Canary, The Northwest Town Police. Search Tex Avery cartoons.
And the thing is that when we were kids, most of the stuff we watched was garbage.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to recommend something.
And it's the same with kids today too, by the way.
Yeah, it's the same with every generation.
Every generation gets its own garbage, and it frustrates me because kids today should watch the same garbage that I watched when I was a kid.
Don't do it to
They
them.
should be forced to watch Camp Caribou.
Camp Caribou. I don't even
Putnam's
know what
Prairie Emporium.
Aren't these all Canadian TV shows?
Exactly, and they should be forced to watch them like I did. The Big Comfy Couch, they should not move past to any other new culture.
I remember I would watch Tintin all the time on TV.
Hated Tintin.
Because he's boring, right?
Yeah, he's boring.
But I don't know.
I also hated Rupert the Bear.
Why did you hate Rupert the Bear?
Boring. and just kind of wimpy,
You wanted a manly bear.
Yeah, give me Popeye. Give me a guy with muscles.
Popeye would probably play very well with kids.
Yeah, possibly.
Colorful, very animated, very violent. That's what kids like.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for your letters. As per usual, you can send them to us at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. And this week, on our Patreon episode, we went a little bit theoretical. It's like school's in session at the Important Cinema Club.
Have you ever heard somebody say, what I'm really looking for in a movie is a good story? We unpack what that means.
And we talk about some of our favorite films. We talk about, do they have good stories? Do they not have good stories? What is our opinion? Do me and Will need stories for our movies? Well, you'll have to listen to it to find out. And maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you won't. You won't know unless you give $5 a month to get 4 exclusive episodes of the Important Cinema Club podcast. And I haven't mentioned this in many episodes, but we're pushing this summer to get 150 Patreon subscribers, because we're going to do a commentary after that, and it's going to be great. And it's going to be a movie that you'll be able to watch at home, and you can just sync up the commentary with. And it's a topic that you're going to want to hear us talk about, because we love it. I'm not going to say we didn't talk about it, because that would be a lie.
Yeah, it has come up on the podcast before.
And I just like to thank our newest Patreon subscribers, Gavin Mead, Stuart Shepard, Tim Vermeulen, Yan Graff, Trey McKinley, and Guy Nelson. Thank you very much for going to patreon.com/Important Cinema Club Podcast and becoming a Patreon subscriber. I and Will really appreciate it. So, next week,
we're back in our comfort zone with, speaking of Hong Kong, with a filmmaker by the name of Godfrey Ho.
Filmmaker? He's so much more.
He makes films
out of other films.
Yeah. So let me try to explain the concept of Godfrey Ho for people who may not know him.
Ninjas.
He's made over 100 films, half of which have the word ninja in the title.
3/4 probably. I looked at like the list of movies. I could not believe how many have ninja in the title.
Ninja Thunderbolt, Ninja Scorpion, Ninja Terminator. Mostly as a filmmaker, he worked with producer Joseph Lai, and he would take unfinished films that for some reason or another people weren't able to get completion funds for, and he would film new scenes involving ninjas and just graft those scenes onto this film, whatever it was. And it could be, a comedy, it could be a drama, it could be anything. And
so we're going to talk about that. And the thing I love the most about him is that he's often compared to someone like Roger Corman. And the fact is that, like, Godfrey Ho didn't even have, like, the acumen of Corman did. Because, like, all he did was ninjas. Like, this worked for him, and he just drove it into the ground over decades.
Although, there are some other kinds of movies he did.
Yeah, he did some Girls with Guns films, like Lethal Panther.
There is a YouTube clip that you may have seen called, like, World's Worst Fight Scene. Do you know the one I'm talking about? It's from Undefeatable with Cynthia Rothrock.
A film I've never seen.
Maybe
we're going to watch it for next week.
Okay.
Yep.
So what are we watching?
Ninja Terminator Undefeatable.
Okay.
I already made a list of 7 that I want to watch. I think, like...
I want to watch U.S. Catman.
Catman.
Yeah.
I think I have Thundering Mantis in there. He did
some kung fu stuff, yeah.
And he did like a giant monster movie, which is like an anomaly in his career about a giant snake. I think it's like Thunder the Snake. He loved the word thunder as well.
One that he's credited with directing is Robo Vampire.
I've seen that one. Actually,
I've seen it too. In fact, I think we were at the same screening.
Back in the day, when I worked at a video store, I made a DVD edition of Robo Vampire with the other 2 movies that he edited in that tinfoil RoboCop into.
Yeah.
And that I actually put it on the shelves of the video store with commentary with me and my friends.
Oh, man.
It's gone. Like, I don't have a copy.
Oh, no.
I have the case and I don't have the disc.
What a tragedy.
Yeah, I know. I think maybe 2 or 3 people picked it up, so hopefully they made copies and they listened to it.
Okay, that's a big preview of next week.
Yeah, I know. We're talking about it. But we're going to talk a lot, I think. So tune in next week. My name is Justin Klug.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Honest and popular don't go hand in hand, and
honest and popular don't go hand in hand. I don't know
if you say that you can play the accordion, you won't be invited to join a rock and roll band. On an early episode of this podcast, we discussed the filmmaker Elaine May, and
I don't remember anything I said.
I remember one thing we said. We said that we didn't much like the movie Ishtar.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed it more than you did. I love the first 30 minutes.
That's what everyone says.
Yes.
The first 30 minutes are great. So I just saw Ishtar again. This was my 3rd viewing in my lifetime of it.
I think we're equal now then. 3? Oh, maybe I've seen it 4 times.
I saw it at the TIFF Bell Lightbox as part of their Elaine May retrospective, curated by Alicia Fletcher. And this screening was introduced by my friend Jesse Hawken.
Mm-hmm.
And
who had previously given us Year of the Dragon on 70mm.
That was an amazing night. And I have to say, after that screening, I think I like Ishtar now.
What, you pulled a haywire? You've seen it enough time that you got Stockholm Syndrome?
Maybe my expectations were just in the right spot at this time, but this time I really enjoyed Ishtar.
I remember us making like a blood pact when we did that episode that we're like, we're not going to watch it for another 15 years.
Well,
I think you said like, I've seen it enough, but I'm glad because you knew if you watch it one more time, you become a convert.
The first 20 minutes or 20 or 30 minutes where they're in New York and they're struggling songwriters. So funny. And on this viewing, those first 20 minutes give you such goodwill that you then carry for the rest of the movie. Mm-hmm. I think, there's plenty of funny stuff in the rest of the movie when they're in Ishtar.
Charles Grodin's very funny.
very funny. And, Warren Beatty's incredible in the film, giving kind of a Stan Laurel performance.
Yes.
And, there are a lot of individually funny scenes. The movie doesn't have the pace that it should have.
I don't think Elaine May, which is weird to say because she did come up in radio, it's like she doesn't have that pace. Mm-hmm. Like the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby kind of like bam, 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 bam. Like so many jokes that if one doesn't hit, another one's coming around the corner.
Yeah, I think we spend like maybe a little too much time with them in the desert.
Yeah.
The humor is like so dry that sometimes it's almost imperceptible.
Yep.
But, the chemistry between Hoffman and Beatty is real.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're very charming. And I think the movie like has some very like sweet and touching things to say about creativity for its own sake and the joy of creating something with your friend, even if what you're creating isn't all that good.
The Important Cinema Club.
I did think about this podcast while watching it. And I also thought about, there's that scene early in the movie when Hoffman is on the ledge and Beatty comes out and says, a lot of people wouldn't have somebody to come out here on a ledge for them.
Yeah.
And Hoffman saying, you're probably so disappointed that I'm not the guy you thought I was. I'm not really talented. I don't have anything. And it makes you realize that you really do need like a lot of delusion to get through life.
Mm-hmm.
Like these guys on some level, they probably know they're not talented songwriters, and yet they tell themselves they're talented songwriters, and like you need to at some level, right?
I love how old they are in the movie too,
Yes.
where it's like they should not be doing this. Like they're way too old for basically doing like a Jim Carrey performance that would have been goofy and sweet in another movie. And in Ishtar, it's sweet, but it's like different. It's also very sad.
It is very sad. But then like if they didn't have this, if they didn't have each other and they didn't have these songwriting ambitions, they would have nothing. Mm-hmm. And, late in the movie, one of them says, some people live lives of quiet desperation. Mm-hmm. They say this while they're in the desert, struggling. Yeah. And they're right, frankly.
Yep. So you think it would be better to just get out there and suffer than just stay inward and suffer?
Yeah.
And that's like the lesson that
At
Ishtar
least they're
taught.
pursuing their dreams, just like us.